Well, welcome to the Empowering Transformation series. I am so excited to have Dr. Keesha Ewers with me today. This will be such a treat for you. Dr. Keesha Ewers is an integrative medical expert, doctor of sexology, family practice, psychotherapist, herbalist, is a board certified in functional medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, and is the founder and medical director of the Academy for Integrative Medicine Health Coach Certification Program. Dr. Keesha has been in the medical field for over 30 years. After conducting the HURT study in 2013, which revolved around healing unresolved trauma, she developed the HURT model for understanding how past childhood trauma impacts adult health. This led to the creation of the You Unbroken online program for patients to heal their own trauma and the Mystic Medicine Deep Immersion Healing Retreats she leads at her home on San Juan Island, Washington. Dr. Keesha is a popular speaker, including at Harvard and from the TED Ed stage, and is a best-selling author of many books. Welcome, Dr. Ewer, and thank you so much for taking this time to help our audience understand this amazing work of reducing stress and releasing past trauma and having the power.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
So how did you come into this line of work?
Well, I started out as a registered nurse in a hospital, primarily intensive care unit and hospice. And I was a pretty high intensity, productivity oriented mother of 4 children, ran marathons, felt like my friends called me the Energizer Bunny, and then one day, and this is how my patients will usually describe it too, all of a sudden, right? I woke up one morning in my 30s with 10 pounds of extra body weight on me, puffiness over my joints. They were red and they were inflamed. And it was as if someone had taken the batteries out of the Energizer Bunny, and I was just flattened and in pain. And I got in to see a doctor. And through the course of the history taking, she asked me about my family history, if there was any history of autoimmune disease in my family. And I said, I think my grandfather had rheumatoid arthritis, and he was wheelchair bound for some time with it, and in fact died at the age I am now, 55. And she just kind of said, okay, well, here are 2 prescriptions. One was for methotrexate, which is a cancer fighting drug, and another for a very strong non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. And she said, when you get worse, not if, come back and we'll change the classification medication, increase your medications. And I just said, well, hang on just a second. Is there anything else I can do? And I was strictly in those days in the Western model of medicine. And so she said, no. I said, I make all my own food. I'm very disciplined. And she said, no, you've just sort of drawn the short straw in the genetic, straws. And I said, all right. And I took the prescriptions. I never filled them. I went home, and on my way home, I remember thinking there has to be something else other than this outside of my model. And so I started doing some research right when I got home, and I found a PubMed article on yoga and autoimmune disease. So the next day I was in my very first yoga class, and the instructor said something, it was enough about Ayurvedic medicine that it piqued my interest. And Ayurveda is the 10,000-year-old sister science of yoga. It comes out of India. It's a very holistic way, right, of viewing life and us inside of it. And he said enough that I went home, started researching, and what I discovered is that the way Ayurveda looks at autoimmune disease is that it's undigested anger, which I thought was very interesting. So I remember thinking, I'm not an angry person, which was quite true. And the thing that, is very true about my patients too, I always say now that there's not anyone with autoimmunity that I've ever met so far. And then at this point, I've treated hundreds of people with autoimmunity, if not into the thousands now, that is not a perfectionist, isn't a people pleaser, and isn't holding on to the past pain of, old stuff. So the poison of past pain is what I call it. And so the other thing that Ayurveda said is that it's pitta people that get autoimmunity, which in the elemental framework of Ayurvedic medicine, it's more fire in you. So there's more likelihood of inflammation. And I was, I'm a pitta person. So I was like, okay, so then what do I do about that? So what I learned that day in my perusal of the world of Ayurveda was that we're all different, which means we all are supposed to feed and water and take care of ourselves differently from one another. There's not one diet to fit different things. It's like everything should be uniquely engineered to you and what your body's asking you for. And so it was really quite illuminating for me to learn about this. And so I started applying these principles. And one of the other things that I learned is how to meditate. And one day I was in meditation and this word autoimmune was dancing in front of my third eye space. And I was a brand new meditator. So I was like, get away. I'm not supposed to have thoughts, right? And then it kept coming. And so I finally took a good look and said, okay, autoimmune. I started really looking at it and I realized, oh, this actually means auto means I'm attacking myself. There's nobody else to blame. There's nothing outside of me that's to blame. This is all an internal thing. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So when did I first want to die then? Because that's what I'm seeing is that auto means I'm killing myself. Mm-hmm. So I started tracing backwards in I call it like the breadcrumb of memories, right? Following this little breadcrumb trail back and asking the question, when did I want to die? Because I certainly didn't then. And I got back to this little 10-year-old girl version of myself. And I looked at her and she was being sexually abused by the vice principal of the elementary school that I attended. And I thought, oh, she wanted to die. Mm-hmm. So this has to have something to do with what's going on in my cells today. I must have informed myself that I want off this planet. I don't understand what's going on. I can't convey this to anybody in a way that they can hear it. I'm not being kept safe. I'm obviously not worthy of being kept safe, which is what my little 10-year-old self thought. And so therefore, I want out. And so I had a very rich life with angels and God and, anything spiritual I had very good communication with. And I was kind of saying, please just take me out of here. And so I thought this has to have something to do with this. Like I informed my cells 20 years ago and they're now just conforming. And that is actually what science tells us is true, that not necessarily the way I just said it, but the fact that early childhood trauma, actually the higher the numbers, frequency, intensity of trauma, then the more risk for all the chronic illnesses we have as adults, including autoimmune disease and cancers. So as soon as I witnessed that and said, oh, she wanted to die, then I started doing work around that. Like the way Ayurveda says, undigested anger, I thought, oh, this experience has to be digested. I actually probably need to feel anger about this and not just have it submerged in my body.
We suppress it so much when we have trauma.
Right.
Yeah.
So I started working with that, and within 6 months, my rheumatoid arthritis was gone, and it hasn't been back in 25 years. So, it's powerful.
Yes. I can relate to so much of what you said. I have Hashimoto's, and I didn't even know what it was. And after meditating, I just heard Hashimoto's. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? I went and looked it up, went to the doctor, got a test. They said yes. They're like, take these medicines. I'm like, no, thank you. And I basically turned those genes off, the little epigenetics, through meditation and diet. And it worked for me doing it that game.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is I always tell people, I talk about reversal of autoimmune disease, not curing it. Like I could get RA back probably within 6 months if I were to go back to the way that I used to perceive myself in my world, which was pretty unsafe. If I were to perceive myself or perceive the world in the way that I used to perceive it back then, and I could absolutely get that gene to flip back on because it's very much present.
It's just there, and we have the power to turn it up or down like a dimmer switch by our actions. Yeah. Now you were talking about, I saw some of your recordings about the HURT study and the ACE study. So you talk a lot about this ACE, and why it's so important. I took the little test. I'm like, yeah, my numbers are high.
So in my book, Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle, I have the ACEs quiz. And then right after it, once you have your total, I say, and now this is not meant to freak you out, this number, right? This is not set in stone any more than your genetics are set in stone. Now you know what you're dealing with. Now you can actually undo the probability that's the statistical probability that's attached to that number.
It's very empowering. We have so much power with how we choose to think, how we act, what we choose to eat.
Yeah.
We have so much power.
It's absolutely true.
So in this study, the HERT study, can you talk to us about that and tell us why the ACE results were what they were, and just talk about that whole process?
So let me first say what the ACEs study was, and then I'll go to my study. So the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, it came about as a result of Kaiser Permanente's weight loss clinic back in the 90s. And they had a very successful weight loss program, and people were coming in, losing weight. And then there was another percentage of people that were coming in, losing weight, but not sticking with it till they hit their goal. They were dropping out. So luckily, the director was curious and cared and started investigating and asking these folks. He found out that most of them had been sexually abused in childhood.
It's just, there's so many.
And so said, well, okay, that's interesting. Why this, so what's happening here? And so took this question and to the Centers for Disease Control, and then they collaborated and created this large study, 17,500 participants who came out of Kaiser Permanente enrollees. And what they asked them were 10 questions. And they said, before the age of 18, did you experience this? And you can think of these things as like what I call capital T trauma, right? That domestic violence, psychological, sexual, emotional, spiritual abuse. Were you neglected, abandoned? Did you have a parent or a caregiver that was addicted to substances, mentally ill, divorced, dead? So that's what you could think of as like those big capital T traumas. The findings were astounding. Over 2/3 of the participants, 17,500 people, had at least an ACE score of 1. So, and then of those, 80% had an ACE score of 2 or more. So, and what the findings were the higher that score, like if you have an ACE score of 6 or more, then statistically it would reduce your life by 20 years compared to somebody that didn't have an ACE score. So mine's 2, and I could add to it probably, but just the frank stuff was 2. And my dad was in the Navy and gone a lot. And so when I looked at that, I thought, oh, well, this does make sense. There are so many, findings that they had from this. Now the HERT study I did in 2013, and what I was looking at was I had all these patients that were coming in to ask me for hormone replacement therapy. And, I would go, okay, so I do prescribe bioidentical hormones. So why do you think you need to be on hormones? And I started seeing some common themes, and I started putting them into categories. And I would always ask, questions like, okay, so why do you think you need to be on hormones? Oh, you have low libido. Well, when's the last time you had a libido level that you were happy with? And then I would have like tears, every time I asked one of these questions, I would have people crying. And obviously hadn't been asked this before. Well, Dr. Keesha, I've never had a libido level. Well, my darling, estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone are not going to do any good then, right? They're not going to magically make something appear that was never there. Or do you like your sex partner? That was another favorite question of mine. Like, do you like your partner? Again, like so many people crying and saying he had an affair 5 years ago, or he lost his job and he's not emotionally connecting to me. I live in Seattle, the land of lots and lots of Microsoft, Amazon, Starbucks, Boeing engineers. And so there are a lot of emotionally neglected women with these male engineering minds, like very gender stereotypes, right? Mm-hmm. And so I would have these women sobbing about this, you know, and I would say, hormones aren't going to fix this. You know, this is not going to fix that. So what I started realizing when I went into the medical literature to see if I could find studies around this is there was nothing. There was absolutely nothing. So I went back to school to get my doctorate in sexology, and it was because I was looking at the relational field between people and with self, like what was going on with that early trauma and how that the outcomes were for your passion and zest for life.
Mm-hmm.
Sexual libido, yes, but I meant like really your overall life vitality. And what I discovered is why the ACEs study came up with the findings that they did. I thought, oh, this is how this happens. Okay. So what I discovered is that first you have an initial event,
Mm-hmm.
and every single person has trauma. So it may not be those 10 capital T's, right? But it's everybody has experiences of betrayal, rejection, having an erosion of, you know, where they feel safe or like the life is trustworthy, where they don't feel good enough, fast enough, fleet enough, smart enough, beautiful enough, you know, all of those things. And those are what you could call lowercase t trauma. And as I was doing my doctoral work, what I found is I was looking at brain images, is that the parts of the brain that a woman needs to feel sexual desire is actually hijacked by the parts of the brain that light up in a stress response in PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So in other words, hormones aren't going to help this a bit, right? This actually has to come from a place of really working on that mental emotional scale. So then I looked further and I found another study that was looking at people that had answered the perceived stress index scale. And I saw that the findings were that if people reported themselves as being overwhelmed, and I don't have a patient ever that has come to me that has said that they're not overwhelmed. It's our cultural banner to be
Yeah, it's
overwhelmed.
almost like a badge how busy you are. And
you're positively reinforced for keeping yourself that busy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, wow, this is interesting. What they saw in this study was that the same brain changes that happen with PTSD happen with people that report themselves as being chronically overwhelmed and stressed. And so the architecture of the brain actually changes. The prefrontal cortex, the part that we call the adult brain that helps you make good decisions and not be impulsive, right,
Mm-hmm.
will shrink. And then the part in the back of the brain, the amygdala, that's part of the limbic system that's looking to make sure that you're safe, that part grows in volume. So that's actually antithetical to having sexual desire. You can't have those things at the same time, which makes sense. If you're a zebra being chased by a lion and you think you're about to get eaten, that zebra that's being chased knows it's not safe to stop and reproduce right now. It's not safe to stop and have a bowel movement right now.
Right.
And the way that information is brought in when you're in a stress response to your brain, right, to your hippocampus is actually stored differently. The kinds of things you bring in if you're just taking a nice stroll through the savannah versus having a lion chase you through it, two different pieces of information, right? And how your brain stores that. So that became very fascinating to me when I started looking at this, because in the hurt model, what I saw was first you have an event that you can't understand as a child, and we all have them. Maybe you had an event where someone was mean to you in the lunchroom and wouldn't let you sit at their table, right? You're going, as a child, you're a self-centered little being because you're a small being trying to figure out how to be in the world of big beings that's governed by big beings. So you're constantly looking around to make sure if you're doing things right and wrong, right? Am I okay? Am I okay? And so if you have something event like that where, oh, I don't know what I did wrong to not be led into this lunch table, right? So then you're going to have a response, a feeling, an emotion to that. Maybe it's sadness, maybe it's fear, maybe it's anger. And then that's going to set up a nervous system response. So fight, flight, freeze, faint is what we traditionally hear with sympathetic nervous system response. But actually for children, it's mainly freeze. Because children are not powerful and autonomous beings, right? They can't fight whatever is going on, and they can't flee for the most part if it's with an adult. And so usually they get frozen response systems in their nervous system. And so what will happen then is then they'll make up a meaning to attach to this incident that's happening that's now been flavored with emotion and nervous system response. So I always use my example because it's easy to track, right? So here's sexual abuse. And so I go into panic because I'm in a 5th grade classroom, and the intercom goes off in the corner of the classroom every single morning to say the Pledge of Allegiance and for the secretary to make announcements. And then very infrequently, randomly, sometimes I get called to the office. But that doesn't matter that it's infrequently, randomly, and sometimes, because every time that thing goes off, I go into freeze. And I'm like a rabbit with my heart rate, my breathing. So I go straight into it, right? And so doesn't matter. It's Pavlovian. Crackle, crackle of the intercom, and I'm off. So the meaning I made up at that age of 10 was because the vice principal was telling, I was in an all-black school, so he was telling me I was white trash and that I was bad, so that's why this was happening. So then the meaning I made up was, I actually have to be perfect to even survive here, and I have to be like as much of a chameleon and invisible as possible. And so the adaptive behavior that will then get attached to that meaning, for me, it was perfectionism. And I was really good at it till I got diagnosed with RA. And that's not a tenable way to live life, right? To drive yourself to perfectionism constantly, constantly, constantly. Eventually you'll break down. So in the hurt model, what happens is there's a bifurcation after that first emotional hurt loop. And you get a pathway that you get to choose. So in adulthood, once your brain is fully developed, because it's not fully developed with that prefrontal cortex till you're 26 years old. So all of your meanings are going to be done with an undeveloped brain when you're a kid, okay? And they make sense to the wise mind of the child at the time, but they usually don't make so much sense to keep with you as an adult. So the moment of like illness or a divorce or the loss of a job or some big, big challenge is actually a really fantastic opportunity to be able to go and re-examine that. So there's this 2 paths that you can take, a fork in the road. The one on the left of the hurt model, in the center of it says, not willing to self-confront, then you're going to keep doing the same stuff. And you're going to get sicker, 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 sicker. And you're going to have lower, 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 lower vitality. And have automatic negative thoughts, rumination, victimization, persecution stuff going on in there. Your perceptual field will be, like this, looking to make sure that you're safe, right? That you're wanted, that you're lovable, you're worthwhile. It's just constantly looking for the places where that's not going to be true. And you'll find it. Yeah. Then the other side of the model is in the center of the looping is willingness to self-confront and go, okay, every single time there's drama in my life, I am present. Maybe there's something here to do with me, right? And so maybe my patterns have something to do with this that I've had forever and ever, and I think of them as normal, but everyone else doesn't. So that willingness to self-confront starts the willingness to start to witness the self, right? Witness what's going on, witness what the child mind decided, and what those adaptive behaviors have been, and a willingness to then heal that and let those go and realize that they're running you from a subconscious ego space and they are keeping you trapped and nobody else is doing it. It's you doing it.
Yes.
Right? So that then changes the entire biochemistry of your physicality when you can do that. Everything changes. Your genetic response, your genetic expression, your adrenals and hormones, your gut health. So all of this shifts as soon as your cells are bathed in a space, you know, I always call it the hot tub of resentment has to get drained and replaced with this beautiful ocean of forgiveness and self-compassion and compassion for life in all of us within it. And that then changes everything.
Yes, it does. It does. You describe so much about me. Yeah. It's interesting. And I'm Veda Pitta. And so I have that fire in me to say, you know, I'm going to look into this. I'm going to do something. That the exhaustion that comes with chronic fatigue, sometimes you just can't, you know, but yeah. And I've been a frustrated perfectionist, and I gave up on perfection because, a frustrated perfectionist for sure. Now I look at my ceiling to see that it's clean.
It's one of the big addictions, actually, that we have in our culture, because we are positively reinforced to it. And so I always say control and perfectionism are two of the biggest addictions that are not looked at. So I never say we've given it up. I always say I'm a recovering perfectionist, a recovering control freak, right?
Yeah. And I've given up on perfection to a point where it's, anyway, not probably healthy to have swung the other direction. It's like, okay, where's the middle?
Hakuna Matata.
So, well, you discussed how basically everyone does have some level of trauma, whether it's capital T or lowercase t. And that, so can we talk about how to heal the brain, you know, and the hormone changes, and be able to live in that higher aspect, that higher potential, where we all want to be better physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. That's where the joy is. So how can we help our sweet brain?
Right. I'm actually writing a book right now on healing trauma. But the book Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle has a number of worksheets that can take you through a process. And the place that I always start people is I always say, okay, just for 24 hours, watch your language. And I always say, I don't mean shit damn in hell. I mean, like, watch your language about how you speak to yourself, how you formulate your expression and your interpretation and perception of yourself in your world and its relationship to God, the divine life force, however you conceptualize of that. And notice, like, do you feel that you're in the flow and supported by that? Or do you feel like you can never catch a break, that there's always something that's being done to you? You're not into a space yet where you can realize that all challenges are done for you. So just notice, like, how are you in all of that? What motivates you? Are you motivated by perfectionism, by people pleasing, by safety? Like, what are the motivating forces that create action for you? In Buddhist psychology, they have this understanding that I just absolutely love, and that is that we have 6 minds, not just one mind, and 5 of them are the sense organs. So we have the eye mind, the nose mind, the mouth mind, the ear mind, and the kinesthetic, right? Mm-hmm. And that is to bring in information from our world. So the 5 organs, sense organs, bring in information to the 6th mind. And then we go through a process of 17 different steps before we arrive at a conclusion about that information. So for example, if I look at you and then I hear you, the looking and the hearing are not happening simultaneously. They're alternating really rapidly. So if you're watching TV or a movie, that's what's happening. It's alternating information. And then you're going through 17 different processes to get to a place where you actually have an opinion about it, right? And the way that they talk about this formation of perception is that how you've done it forever is how you're going to keep doing it forever, unless you can intervene in the middle, the 8th step, which they call the doorway of karma, the gateway of karma. And what they're saying when they say the gateway of karma is that if you can actually get into that space right there in that little tiny nanosecond and have a different experience of whatever it is that you've always done, then you actually set up your future differently. So I always say, like, the more time you can spend, quantum physics says this too, right? That time's not linear. We have a time-space continuum. Einstein identified it this way too. Like, you have a cell of time. It's not in a line. You're the being that you were at conception, you have access to, and you also have the being that will take its last breath in this body. And they're all in the same space, like time-space bubble. They're not strung out. Like, you can actually access all of them. So the more time you spend with the little one who made up meanings according to the development of her mind at that time, which made so much sense to that little one, she perceived that way, then that means your older self is also going to perceive things that way. Like, that's the gateway of karma. So if you can get in there and you can say, oh no, sweetheart, you don't have to be perfect to survive. I've got you now.
I've gone back to my 6-year-old self. And even for me, I was placed in a leg brace. When I was born, I had hip dysplasia. So I was forced in a very vulnerable position for months and months. And then in one of my meditations, I had the vision of a doctor coming in. And I don't know what he did, but when I was asking, did I ever have sexual trauma? That was the vision that I had. It wasn't from my parents, but as a baby in this very vulnerable place.
Right.
And so, yeah. And it just, so I've gone to that baby place and healed her and brought her to Christ and said, hey, get the love, get the protection, and then bring her back into me and grow her up and say, okay, we're all together.
Right. And so when you do that, then automatically your older self becomes more grounded, more stable, more securely attached, right? And then has wisdom rather than reactivity, right?
Yes.
So that time-space continuum is all this one, you can kind of just like fold into it and go, oh, I actually, if I don't like the way things are going right now, I can get into that little space right there, and I can see how I've always done it, and I can shift it.
Yes. And I've done the same thing with, okay, what would be the Lori Kay that was powerful and can do things, and not this, I'm too tired, so I would imagine what that was like, and imagine her coming down and healing me and what I was at.
Yeah.
So I'm doing better at 52 than I was between, about 27 to 37.
Same here. I always say I'm
like,
a much stronger version of myself, right? And that's beautiful.
But I was reaching out to me here when I was struggling.
Yeah.
But so, what else would you like to share with us with the brain hormone changes, and or do you want to dive into your Academy for the Integrative Medicine?
Well, I want to kind of finish up answering the question you were asking me before, where I said, watch your language. There's a second part to this.
Okay, lovely.
And I'd like to give this to people so that they have it. It's an exercise that's in, again, solving the autoimmune puzzle, and you can just do it in your journal, where it's fascinating to me because I was just working with somebody last week, and she said she was crying because she has autoimmune disease and she's had chronic fatigue for years and years and years and fibromyalgia. And she said, I feel like you said, like I heard you talk about on a summit, I feel betrayed by God. And I'm finally able to say that. And I said, well, good for you, but what's happening? Like, why do you feel betrayed by God? Because I'm a righteous woman and I do what I do what's right, and I pray and I give to people. I have a life of service, and I don't understand how this could be happening to me. And I said, so you're looking at this illness as a punishment then instead of a blessing? And she said, well, of course. And I said, well, this thing that I'm about to give you as a homework assignment is expectations. So we have these two different kinds of expectations. One is explicit expectations, and explicit agreements are ones in which you enter an agreement with another party and they buy in too. You've explicitly agreed to this thing, right? My husband and I have explicitly agreed to be monogamous in our marriage. Okay. And so I can expect that that will be true until we visit it another time and something else happens, right? But right now, that's the way it is, and that's the way we both want it. So an implicit agreement comes from having an expectation that you made an agreement with somebody, but actually there was no one on the other side that agreed to what you decided was true. Those cause suffering. And many people entered those with God. And so, you know, one of the things that I said to her was, okay, so in the Garden of Gethsemane, before Christ's crucifixion, actually he said, can you please take this cup away? I don't want it, right? And then what did he say?
But if it's your will, I will do it.
Thy will, not my will, be done.
Yeah.
Let thine will be my will, right?
Yeah.
And so we, for some reason, and I don't know how this exactly happened, humans have some weird, especially in our culture, expectation that we can pray suffering away. Nobody has ever said that that's a thing. So the righteous shall be blessed. So the interpretation is that, oh, I won't ever have to have a challenge. I won't ever have to struggle. What if the struggle is the blessing? St. Teresa said there are more tears shed for answered prayers than unanswered prayers. And I could not agree with her more. Because the thing that we think is going to make us happy, that we're praying for, that we're grasping for, that we're actually attached to, right? And the thing we have an aversion to, I don't want to be sick, I don't want to slow down, I don't want to get old, I don't want to die. That's so weird, because all you have to do is look at nature and see that the way it's been set up is that when you are born, you will die. And if you're lucky enough to age before you die, you're going to deteriorate. That is how it works. And there's nothing in nature that shows us otherwise. So in other words, God never said you are not going to deteriorate if you pray. And I don't get why people do this, because it causes extreme suffering. They feel so betrayed when they get an illness. And so what I've been trying to help people see is like, how about you drop into, well, thy will be done, not mine. Mm-hmm. Let my will be thy will. And what if this is actually the blessing? Anyone that's come out the other side of things like I've come out of breast cancer and rheumatoid arthritis will usually turn around and say, gosh, those are two of the best things that ever happened to me. Why do they say that? Because they actually grew and they actually expanded their consciousness. They got really in touch with what it means to be in the flow of the divine. They really understood finally, instead of having it be like an intellectual process, right?
Right. Yes.
Yeah. And so the expectation exercise is fascinating for you to do, because you can write down all the places, and this will take weeks if you do it right, all the thousands of implicit agreements that you have on the table that you have an expectation for someone else to meet. And some of them are, like do it with, like what are your expectations of your spouse, of your children, of your siblings, of your mother and father, like of the government, of your dog, of your house. Do you expect your house not to fall in? Do you expect your house not to have mold? Do you expect, like what are all these implicit agreements? If I do everything right, then I'm going to get X. Well, who says what's right? And no one ever promised you X. And so this attachment and aversion, right? Those are the things that cause suffering. And it's when you can actually relax into it and go, oh, if I really want to be an instrument in the hands of the divine, then I am going to surrender my will. And when you do that and you drop into this, I always say the body has the most thankless job on this planet. Your consciousness goes to sleep at night and your body never gets a rest. It just never gets a rest. Heart beats until you die. Mm-hmm. Lungs breathe until you die. liver detoxes until you die. And I just haven't met too many people that really witness that with the level of appreciation and gratitude that it deserves, right? This vehicle for your spirit, instead of looking at it and saying, how come you don't look like this, or how come you don't have this level of energy, and how come you're doing this, and what, blah, 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 you know, like, have you ever really thought and dropped into the immense blessing that this body is? And have you ever really understood the level of entitlement that you have around it? That your eyes flutter open in the morning and they see the beauty that you're surrounded with. That your ears get to bring in that beautiful information of love from your loved ones, music, waterfalls, the wind in the trees, the birds singing, you know, that you get to smell the aromas of this beautiful life and taste them and touch them, you know, and do you have the level of appreciation that actually warrants, instead of, I hurt, I don't have enough energy, I'm fat, my skin is broken out, my hair is falling out, you know? It's like, there's a whole different way of being with the joy and gratitude and appreciation for what is. And then it changes the architecture of your brain and your biochemistry, so the things that you actually have been averse to lighten and actually go away. Pretty magical, really.
I have felt that for myself, and it's wonderful how powerful journaling can be, and doing it with a pencil or a pen on paper, like physically writing it out, not typing it out. There's been times when I have given voice to my hands, you know, hands, you have something to say to me. I lost I couldn't use my hands for a long time. My doctor said, don't touch things and don't be stressed, because I wouldn't get on the cortisone shots.
Right.
And anyway,
I lost mine too because of RA.
Yeah, I had to give a voice to my hands, and it's like, all you do is send anger to me all day long.
Right.
Like, oh, you're right. You know, and so I started talking to my hands with compassion, like I wouldn't be a child, you know. It's like, oh, this is, and it really brought, it might sound a little crazy, but it brought so much healing and understanding all to just me. Yeah.
Right. Why would that be crazy?
It helps. It works.
I know, but why would that sound crazy? You know, I mean, that's the thing is the cultural conversation, I think, needs to not have those qualifiers in it, you know, of yes, you need to talk to every part of your body and witness it and give it gratitude and appreciation.
I celebrate the littlest things all the time. It's like, good job, buddy. I'm so proud of you.
I mean, look at this earlobe. It's so cool. Actually, you can hang pretty baubles from it, you know? It's just like, have you ever really been thankful for your earlobe?
I like to be in joy. So
me too.
Oh, I want to honor your time, but I just so enjoy listening and having this time with you. What would you like to leave us with? And you're welcome to have this go longer and teach us more. But what is on your heart that you would like to share with us?
Oh, I just left it. That is exactly what I wanted to say, is just to really, you know, take the plug out of the resentment tub, drain it out, and fill it instead with this lovely compassion for this beautiful being that you are, and this beautiful body that carries the being who you are around, so you can live your purpose, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I know, Dr. Ewer, that for you, I will be inviting our audience later at the beginning of October to join in on a webinar with you to explore different aspects and hear more of your teaching. So the audience can look for that.
We're going to do the connection between the stress resentment process and what happens inside genetic expression and hormones. Yeah.
Yes, and dive deep into that.
Yes.
So it's, when I learned about epigenetics and how those molecules are just turning on those genes, telling them how loud to talk or express themselves, there's a difference there. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have the most lovely day. And it's so wonderful to find doctors who believe in the whole body and And it looks like you take patients from around the world that can
Yeah.
apply to be. That is such, we live in such an amazing time. We really do. I'm so grateful for this time that we are in.
I
And I wish
agree.
you the best on your journey and how you're serving the world. And thank you again.
Thank you. You too. Bye, everybody.
Bye. All right. Thank you. I appreciate
Thank you. It was a lot of fun to
You are
connect
all
with
that I
you.
wanted to be. I always wanted to be a doctor, but it was more the energy level. I have 4 children, and the energy
Me
level.
too. I have 4 children.
I just couldn't quite muster the degree out of me.
What did you do? Like, what's your
You know what? I got into the natural ways of doing fit zoning, and I got into Ayurveda. I got into dabbling in a lot of different things. I do energy work, a lot of Reiki master, and I have the faith to move molecules. So like I've been able to restructure a little baby's esophagus and help her keep her food down. And it's just, yeah. So I've got more spiritual, but not the. I wish I had the MD way of look. This really worked.
I'm not an MD, Lori Kay. I'm a nurse practitioner and and have a PhD.
Right.
That's where my doctorate is. So yeah, come and join our health coaching program. A lot of people that interview me wind up in there getting that piece that they didn't get that adds to what they're already doing, so that you can do some lab testing and really understand how the physical part and mental, emotional,
Yeah, and that's in your that other program that you have there.
The Academy for Integrative Medicine, yeah.
Okay, I'll have to look into that.
Yeah.
Well,
all right. Thank you so much.
Have a lovely day.
You too. Take care.